My name is Alara Hayes, and for most of my life, I have been a student of the quiet things. I find my solace in the intricate patterns of lichen on old stones, the slow, deliberate unfurling of a fern frond, the silent language of root systems knitting the earth together. My work as a botanical researcher is less a career and more a continuation of a childhood spent in the damp, green corners of the world, trying to understand the things that thrive without applause. This inclination toward the understated, the overlooked, has shaped the person I am. It has also, for a long time, defined my place within my own family, a quiet corner they rarely thought to look into. My family operates on a different frequency. My parents, Richard and Eleanor, value polish and presentation. They measure success in stock portfolios and social invitations. My older sister, Stella, is their masterpiece. She is bright and dazzling, a successful investment banker who moves through the world with an effortless confidence that has always felt like a foreign language to me. Where I am muted earth tones, she is a vibrant, primary color. We love each other in the way that strangers from the same small town might feel a vague, ancestral connection, but we do not speak the same language. I have always known this. But it is one thing to know a truth and another to have it spelled out for you in the cold, sterile air of a lawyer's office. That was where the story truly began. In a glass-walled conference room overlooking the steel and concrete heart of downtown Portland, the air thick with the scent of expensive leather and unspoken resentments. The reading of my grandfather Arthur's will had been, until its final moments, exactly what I'd expected. My parents, Richard and Eleanor, sat beside Stella, their expressions a mixture of somber performance and quiet pride. Mr. Albright, the family's longtime attorney, read through the standard bequests with a dry, professional cadence. When he reached the primary inheritance, a pleased smile touched my mother's lips. He announced that Stella would receive the bulk of the estate, the penthouse apartment downtown, the stock portfolio valued at just over $5 million, and control of the Hayes Family Foundation, a charity that was more of a social vehicle than a genuine philanthropic endeavor. My father placed a comforting hand on Stella's arm, a gesture of both condolence and congratulations. Then, they turned to me. The three of them, a united front. My father's voice was low, meant to sound like gentle guidance. He left you your education, Alara. That was his gift to you. Now, he said, his smile tight, it's time for you to go earn your own. My mother nodded in agreement, her gaze flickering over my simple linen dress as if to punctuate his point. Stella looked away, a brief, uncomfortable tightening around her eyes, the only sign she'd even registered the moment. I did not cry. I did not argue. I had spent a lifetime learning to absorb these moments, to fold them into a quiet place inside myself. I focused on the way the light caught the polished surface of the mahogany table, turning it into a dark, unreadable pool. My pulse was a frantic drum against my eardrums, but my face remained a placid mask. This was the role I knew how to play, the quiet one, the one who didn't need, the one who understood. But then, something shifted. Mr. Albright, who I thought had finished, cleared his throat. He reached into his leather briefcase, his movements slow and deliberate. There is one more item, he said, his voice cutting through the smug finality in the room. An addendum to the will, accompanied by a personal letter. Arthur was very specific about the sequence of this reading. He produced a simple, cream-colored envelope, softened and worn at the edges. My grandfather's familiar, elegant script was on the front. My name, Alara. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. My mother's smile vanished, replaced by a thin, hard line. My father's hand, which had been resting on Stella's arm, began to tap a nervous rhythm against the table. Stella's eyes, which had been full of a sad, distant triumph, narrowed into sharp points of suspicion. That envelope, held in the lawyer's steady hand, was a stone tossed into the placid, carefully maintained surface of our family. It was the beginning of a reckoning, a storm that would dismantle every lie they had built to keep the world, and me, in a place they could understand. And the heart of that storm was waiting for me in a place I hadn't dared to visit in over a year, Crestwood Farm, my grandparents' homestead nestled in the misty hills outside of Port Blossom. where the wind whistling through the Douglas firs once sounded like a lullaby, and now, I feared, would only carry the weight of ghosts. The drive out to the coast was a journey through memory. The highway wound its way out of the city's grip, the landscape softening from concrete to green. I passed familiar landmarks, the old roadside stand selling Marionberry jam, the turnoff for Silver Falls where Grandpa Arthur taught me the names of the mosses, and with each one, a layer of the carefully constructed numbness I wore began to peel away. By the time I turned onto Whispering Pine Road, the gravel crunching under my tires like broken bones, my heart was a raw, exposed thing. Crestwood Farm looked just as I remembered, and yet completely alien. The old farmhouse, with its peeling white paint and deep green shutters, seemed to sag a little, as if weary. The air smelled of damp earth, pine needles, and the salty tang of the nearby ocean, a scent that had always meant safety. Today, it felt like an accusation. The wind chimes on the porch, a gift from me one long ago summer, tinkled a hollow, mournful tune. They were once the soundtrack to afternoons spent shelling peas with my grandmother, June, the scent of her sun tea brewing on the windowsill. Now, they sounded like echoes from a life I no longer belonged to. I hesitated on the bottom step of the porch, my hand hovering near the worn brass doorknob. The two sprawling Japanese maples in the front yard still listed slightly to the south, their leaves a fiery red against the gray sky, but the welcome they once offered was gone. When the door finally creaked open, it wasn't to the warm smile I had spent the entire drive praying for. My grandmother stood in the doorway, her small frame as rigid as the ancient oaks at the edge of the property. Her silver hair was pulled back in its usual neat bun, but her face, etched with a new map of grief lines, was a mask of cold disappointment. So, she said, her voice lacking its usual warmth, sharp enough to cut. You finally decided to show up. I stood frozen, the words I had practiced in the car dissolving on my tongue. I searched her face for a flicker of the woman who had taught me how to press flowers, who had listened for hours to my childish theories about soil. I looked for warmth, for relief, even for confusion. There was only a wall of ice. Grandma, I whispered, my voice hoarse. What's happening? What was that at the lawyer's office? What's happening, she repeated, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. They told me what was happening. They told me you were too busy with your important research to be bothered. That you had a new life, one that didn't have room for us. Her voice, which had started as a blade, wavered for just a moment before hardening again. Your grandfather, Alara. He asked for you. Every single day, on his deathbed, he asked for you. The air rushed out of my lungs. I felt a dizzying wave of vertigo, and I reached out to steady myself against the doorframe. That's not true, I managed, the words tasting like ash. That's a lie. I tried to call. Every week. I came by. I came in August for his birthday. Stella was here. She met me at the gate. She said you were both resting, that no one was up for visitors. My grandmother's eyes, the same deep blue as a winter sea, narrowed. We were here, Alara. We were always here. The silence that followed was a physical weight, pressing down on me, stealing my breath. After a long moment, she turned and walked back into the dim quiet of the house, leaving the door open in a gesture that was not quite an invitation. I followed her in, the air inside thick and still, heavy with the scent of old books, beeswax, and something else, unspoken grief. She disappeared into my grandfather's study and returned holding a small, worn, leather-bound notebook. It was the one he kept by the telephone, filled with doodles and phone numbers. She opened it to a page near the back and held it out to me. This, she said, her voice flat, is the number he kept calling. Over and over. I recognized his handwriting immediately, the neat, slightly slanted block letters of an engineer. And I recognized the number he had written. But it wasn't mine. It was off by 2 digits, a number I had never seen before. Grandma, this isn't my number, I said, my own voice a stranger's. It's not even close. I've had the same cell phone number since I was in college. She stared at the notepad, her brow furrowed in a confusion that slowly, terribly, began to melt the ice in her eyes. They told us you changed it, she whispered. They said you didn't want to be tracked down. That you were, ashamed of this place. Of us. No, the word was a strangled breath. I backed away until my shoulders hit the cool plaster of the wall, needing its solidness to keep me upright. No, Grandma. They lied to you. They lied to both of us. They cut me off from you on purpose. The notebook slipped from her fingers, landing softly on the braided rug. Her hands, usually so steady as they tended her rose bushes, began to tremble. She sank into the worn, floral armchair by the cold fireplace, her body seeming to collapse as if her bones had suddenly given up. I knelt on the floor beside her. They told me the funeral was at 2 o'clock, I whispered, the confession tearing from my throat. I got to the church. It was empty. The doors were locked. I thought I'd gotten the day wrong, that I'd lost my mind. She looked up at me then, her face pale and shattered. The funeral was at 10 in the morning, she said, her voice soft with dawning horror. They told everyone you didn't bother to show up. That you didn't care enough to say goodbye. My breath caught in a sob I could no longer suppress. I would never have missed his funeral. Never. For a moment, the quiet room was filled with the sound of my own ragged grief, a sound I had choked down for months. And then I felt it, a crack in the dam I had built around my heart. The room blurred as tears streamed down my face. I reached for her hand, clutching it like a small child lost in the dark. I didn't know, I cried, the words muffled. I didn't know he was that sick. I didn't know anything. Her hand, warm and familiar, closed around mine. Her voice, when she finally spoke, had lost its sharp edge, replaced by a deep, resonant sorrow. We know the truth now, Alara, she said, her thumb stroking the back of my hand. That's what matters. We know. We sat like that for a long time as the afternoon light faded outside, the silence no longer a weapon, but a shared space of mourning for all the things we had lost, time, trust, a proper goodbye. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked a steady, solemn rhythm, each tick a second that could never be reclaimed. Outside, the wind rustled the dry leaves across the porch, like restless, whispering memories. Finally, June stood. Her movements were slow, but the haze of grief in her eyes had been replaced by a spark of steel I recognized. It was the same look she got when a deer ate her prize-winning hydrangeas, a quiet, unyielding resolve. I am calling them, she said. Calling who? I asked, my voice still thick. She didn't answer right away. She walked to the old, black rotary phone mounted on the kitchen wall, a relic Arthur had refused to replace, claiming it had a more honest ring. She began to dial, the whirring clicks of the rotary mechanism sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet house. Each turn of the dial felt deliberate, a punctuation mark in a sentence she had been waiting a lifetime to speak. Her fingers, thinned by age, were steady. When the line connected, her voice was glacial. Eleanor. I need you, Richard, and Stella. Here. At the farm. Now. A muffled, protesting squawk came through the receiver. June cut it off. No, it cannot wait. Be here in an hour. She placed the heavy receiver back in its cradle without another word. Then she turned to me, her eyes clear and sharp. Mr. Albright is on his way as well. I blinked, confused. Grandpa's lawyer? She nodded, a grin set to her jaw. Your grandfather. He left some things, instructions. He made it very clear they were only to be read with everyone present. So, that is exactly what we are going to do. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I just nodded, a nod of dread and a strange, fragile hope tightening in my chest. For the next hour, I sat at the small kitchen table, the same one where Grandpa Arthur used to patiently explain the physics of photosynthesis to me while he drank his morning coffee. I traced the worn grain of the oak with my finger, remembering the day I'd told him I wanted to study the symbiotic relationship between fungi and tree roots. He hadn't laughed or called it strange. He had simply said, "The world is a conversation, Alara. You're one of the few who knows how to listen." I looked around the familiar kitchen, the same faded gingham curtains, the same low hum of the ancient refrigerator. Everything was the same, but the air itself had changed. It was charged, humming with the invisible energy of a gathering storm. Soon, headlights swept across the kitchen window. Footsteps, hesitant and heavy, echoed on the porch. The doorbell chimed. June placed a calming hand on my shoulder. "Stay here," she whispered. "I'll call you when it is time." From the kitchen, I could hear their arrival. My mother's voice, artificially sweet. "Oh, June, goodness. It smells exactly the same in here." "So rustic." My father's, calm and authoritative. "Mother Hayes, I do hope this is important. We had a dinner engagement." And Stella's, a weary, dismissive sigh. "Seriously? This couldn't have been an email? The estate is already being processed." Then a heavy silence, followed by my grandmother's voice, colder than the winter wind off the Pacific. "Please sit down. All of you. Mr. Albright is on his way to read Arthur's final instructions." I could picture their faces perfectly, the confusion warring with annoyance, the flicker of greed. They didn't know I was here. They had no idea what was coming. And, in truth, neither did I. But buried deep beneath the hurt and the anger, a quiet hope began to bloom, that for once, the silence would be broken. That someone would finally say out loud what I had always known in my bones, that what they called love was a transaction, and that their brand of silence wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice. The front door creaked open again. A new voice, steady and professional. "Mr. Albright. This won't take long," he said. "But it must be done properly, as per my client's explicit wishes." That was my cue. My grandmother's voice called out, clear and strong. "Alara. Come in now, please." I stood, my legs unsteady but my spine straight. My heart hammered against my ribs. As I stepped through the kitchen doorway and into the living room, 3 heads swiveled in my direction. 3 pairs of eyes widened, their carefully composed expressions unraveling in an instant. My mother's polite smile froze and shattered. My father's jaw clenched. Stella's face went completely pale, all the color draining away as if she'd seen a ghost. The air in the room crackled like static electricity. They weren't just surprised to see me. They were terrified. They stared, mouth slightly agape. My father compulsively adjusted his tie, a nervous habit I hadn't seen since my college graduation, the last event where my academic achievements had been a source of public pride for him. Stella looked as if someone had yanked the script from her hands mid-performance, leaving her stranded and exposed on a hostile stage. I held their gazes one by one. If they expected me to shrink, they were about to be disappointed. I had spent a lifetime making myself smaller for their comfort. Not anymore. June gestured to an empty armchair across from them, beside the fireplace. I sat down slowly, deliberately, taking a deep breath to steady the tremor in my hands. Mr. Albright gave me a brief, unreadable nod before opening his briefcase and extracting the same worn, cream-colored envelope. "This," he began, his voice filling the tense silence, "is a codicil to the last will and testament of Arthur Graham Hayes, recorded and sealed 1 month prior to his passing. As instructed, he has also included a personal letter to be read aloud." No one moved. The only sound was the frantic ticking of the clock on the mantel. He cleared his throat. "To my beloved wife, June," he read. June didn't flinch, her gaze fixed on the empty space where my grandfather used to sit. "I leave you Crestwood Farm, the house, the land, and all its holdings, along with sufficient funds for your comfort and care for the remainder of your days. You know where to find the rest." He turned the page. "To my granddaughter, Alara Hayes." The atmosphere in the room tightened, became breathable. "I leave you the entirety of the Hayes Legacy Seed Trust, located at 114 Whispering Pine Road, Port Blossom. This includes the conservation lands, the laboratory facility, all related equipment, the operational endowment fund, and all intellectual property associated with my research in native plant propagation and soil restoration." A sharp, strangled gasp cut through the air. It wasn't mine. It was my mother's. Her eyes darted frantically between me and Stella. I kept my hands folded calmly in my lap, my gaze steady on Mr. Albright. He continued, "And finally, the remainder of my liquid estate, all financial holdings, stocks, and retirement funds not allocated to the aforementioned bequests, shall be divided equally between my 2 granddaughters, Alara and Stella Hayes." There it was. A quiet, elegant earthquake. The aftershock came immediately. Stella shot to her feet, the legs of her chair screeching against the hardwood floor. What? She spat, her voice a raw, ugly thing. He gave her the trust? The entire research facility. Her voice cracked on the last word. That's absurd. You told me. Her trembling finger was pointed directly at our parents. You both said it would all be mine. You said that if I just kept visiting, if I played the part, if I managed his affairs, that everything would come to me. My father's lips thinned into a bloodless line, but he said nothing. My mother stared at the Persian rug as if willing it to open up and swallow her. I just sat there, a silent observer at the dismantling of my own family. Mr. Albright held up a hand. There is one more thing. Mr. Hayes also wrote a personal letter to Alara, which he requested be read aloud, in this room, in front of all of you. Stella let out a bitter, humorless laugh. My grandmother retrieved a folded, slightly yellowed piece of paper from the drawer of the end table beside her and handed it to the lawyer. He wrote this the week before he died, she said softly. He made me promise. Mr. Albright unfolded the letter with care. My grandfather's handwriting, broad and confident, filled the page. To my dearest Alara, he began. If you are hearing these words, it means I am no longer walking beside you. But my belief in you, my quiet listener, remains. It is, and always has been, my most enduring legacy. The words wrapped around me like a warm blanket. You were always the one who saw the magic in the details, he read on, his voice a calm anchor in the turbulent room. The observer, the thinker. The one who asked how and why, when everyone else was only interested in how much. Stella slumped back into her chair, defeated. My mother's hands twisted a silk scarf in her lap. My father stared blankly out the window at the darkening sky. You learned to speak the language of the forest, Alara, in a family that only ever valued the language of the boardroom. You were not a problem to be solved. You were a truth they refused to learn. A single tear escaped and traced a hot path down my cheek. I didn't wipe it away. I wanted them to see it. I wanted them to hear every single word. I saw you at 7 years old, Mr. Albright continued, his voice steady, mapping the lichen patterns on the river stones, clutching that little notebook as if it held the secrets of the universe. I saw the light in your eyes when you found a pattern no one else had noticed. Your family saw a distraction. I saw a scientist. My chest ached with a bittersweet recognition. I still had that notebook. I saw how that light in you dimmed when your mother would dismiss your discoveries with a wave of her hand. I saw how your father would change the subject every time you tried to share something you were proud of. I heard my mother's sharp intake of breath. Stella was easier for them. She sparkled in the ways they understood, bright, immediate, transactional. But you, my dear Alara, you glowed. A deep, steady, phosphorescent light. And instead of learning to see in the dark, they tried to snuff you out. Stella folded her arms tightly across her chest, her expression shuddered. I do not blame her entirely. She played the role she was given. But you wrote your own. And that, my girl, takes a courage they will never comprehend. He read the final lines. You deserve to be celebrated, Alara. Not hidden. And while I cannot undo the years of silence, I can give you what is rightfully yours. A place to grow freely. A place to build without apology. A place to speak your language and, finally, be heard. Mr. Albright carefully folded the letter and placed it on the table. The silence that followed was thick with everything that had been unsaid for 30 years. It was heavy with regret, resentment, and a startling, painful clarity. I cleared my throat, my voice surprisingly steady. I remember that project with the lichen, I said softly, looking not at my parents, but at the empty space beside my grandmother. I won the regional science fair for it. Mom didn't come to the ceremony. She was at Stella's ballet recital. Stella flinched. I brought the trophy home and hid it in my closet. I felt like I had done something wrong, something shameful. My father finally spoke, his voice strained. Alara, now is not the time to dredge up the past. No, I said, a new strength sharpening my voice. It is the only time. Because the past is all I ever got. All I ever heard from you was, why can't you be more like your sister? I turned to Stella. And from you? Every time I had a small success, you treated it like a personal attack. She scoffed, a flicker of her old fire returning. Oh, please. Don't play the victim. I worked hard for my success. You did, I agreed calmly. You visited Grandpa when it was convenient. You smiled when you were told to. You managed his portfolio because you knew it would pay off. Her face hardened. And you? You think you're so pure? You just disappeared. No, I said, the word like a crack of a whip. I was erased. You told Grandma I'd changed my number. You gave Grandpa a fake one so he could never reach me. You met me at the gate and told me he was too tired for visitors. That isn't distance, Stella. That is a deliberate act of erasure. My mother stood abruptly, her face flushed. That is enough, Alara. You are twisting things. This family has been through enough grief. This family, my grandmother cut in, her voice ringing with authority, has been living a lie. A lie I enabled for far too long by believing you. She looked at my mother. I watched you dismiss her, ignore her, treat her like a strange and inconvenient guest in her own family. I believed you when you said she didn't care. I should have known my own son's heart better. I should have known my own granddaughter. My father shifted in his seat. Look, she got her education. Her summer programs. All that travel for her research. That wasn't free. No, it wasn't, I said, the final piece clicking into place. But you didn't pay for it. Grandpa did. Every tuition bill, every plane ticket, every subscription to an academic journal. You didn't even know what continent I was on half the time. My voice broke, but I pushed through. You made me feel like a charity case. He made me feel like an investment. Stella stood again, her composure crumbling. This is insane. I was the one who stayed. I was the good one. I should get everything. No, I said, my voice quiet but firm. You were the one who performed. I was the one he loved. And now, you don't get to erase me anymore. Grandma June rose to her feet. She walked to the center of the room, her small stature radiating an immense, unshakable power. I am ashamed that Arthur left you anything at all, she said, looking directly at my parents and Stella. What you did was not love. It was a long, cruel transaction. And I am ashamed that I didn't see it for what it was. She pointed a trembling but resolute finger toward the door. Leave. You are not welcome in this house. My mother gasped. June. Out, my grandmother repeated, her voice low and final. Now. For a moment, they were frozen. Then, Stella grabbed her designer handbag and stormed out, her heels clicking like angry punctuation on the floorboards. My parents followed, stunned into silence, muttering about legal counsel. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind them. Not with a slam, but with a quiet, irrevocable finality. I stood in the center of the room, rooted to the spot, the silence ringing in my ears. The air felt different. Lighter. As if the house itself had finally exhaled a breath it had been holding for decades. June walked over and sank onto the sofa, her hands, which had been trembling, now resting peacefully in her lap. They'll fight this, I said, my voice a whisper. Let them, she replied, her gaze calm. The truth is on our side now. And this time, we don't have to let them in the door. It took a long time for the meaning of those words to truly sink in. For my entire life, I had been trying to earn my place at a table where a seat was never set for me. I had been trying to win the love of people who measured affection in dividends and social currency. My grandfather had seen it all. And in his final act, he had not just left me an inheritance, he had given me back my own story. I think I need some air, I murmured. June nodded, and I stepped out onto the back porch. The familiar boards creaked under my feet. The air was cool and clean, smelling of rain and cedar. Beyond the garden, I could see the silhouette of the old glass greenhouse where Grandpa Arthur had let me conduct my first, disastrous experiments with hydroponics. He'd called my wilted lettuce a noble failure, and we had laughed until we cried. I thought of the small, quiet girl I had been, her knees perpetually stained with dirt, and I realized with a pang of grief and gratitude that she had never been truly lost. She had just been waiting. When I came back inside, June was putting a kettle on the stove. He started planning the seed trust over 5 years ago, she said, her back to me. before he even knew he was sick. I looked at her, startled. He told me he wanted to build you a place where you never had to ask permission to be brilliant. The tears that came then were not of grief, but of release. Quiet, cleansing, and profound. That night, I slept in my old childhood bedroom. The faded, floral wallpaper was the same. The mattress was too soft, but the ceiling was still covered in the glow-in-the-dark stars Grandpa had helped me arrange into scientifically accurate constellations. As I lay there, I realized the house no longer felt haunted by ghosts. It felt reclaimed. The next morning, I made coffee and brought 2 mugs to the kitchen table. June folded her newspaper and gave me a tired but genuine smile. So, she asked, "What now?" "I think," I said, looking out the window as the morning sun broke through the mist, illuminating the dew on the garden. "I'll go see it." "The trust." She nodded, her eyes shining. He would like that. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the urge to run, to prove myself, or to explain my existence. I didn't feel invisible. And that more than any land, more than any money, was the true inheritance. It was permission to begin. The Hayes Legacy Seed Trust wasn't a sterile, modern building. It was a beautifully restored timber frame barn, nestled at the end of Whispering Pine Road. It had a soaring, vaulted ceiling with exposed beams and a vast, north-facing wall made entirely of glass, flooding the space with gentle, consistent light. Inside was a wonderland. State-of-the-art laboratory equipment, microscopes, germination chambers, DNA sequencers, sat untouched on long, maple workbenches. Shelves were lined with neatly labeled, unopened boxes, all bearing my name. In the very center of the main room, on a specially built workbench, sat a single object, my childhood notebook. The one with the faded cover and my clumsy drawings of lichen. My knees went weak. He hadn't just built me a laboratory. He had built a sanctuary for my soul. In the months that followed, I didn't just move into the trust, I came alive in it. I hired 2 former colleagues, Ben and Maya, brilliant, kind-hearted ecologists who shared my belief that science should serve the earth, not just exploit it. We started small, with a grant to restore a local strain of Camas lily, a plant vital to the indigenous history of the region. We made mistakes. We celebrated small victories. We worked from dawn until dusk, fueled by coffee and a shared sense of purpose. Every day, I unlocked the doors to a place that didn't demand I be anyone but myself. One rainy afternoon, feeling overwhelmed by a funding rejection, I found myself sitting on the floor of the lab, surrounded by spreadsheets. I pulled Grandpa's letter from my bag. I'd asked Mr. Albright for the original and read a line I had memorized. "You wrote your own role." It wasn't just comfort, it was a directive. That night, I drafted a proposal for something new, a youth outreach program we called the Young Naturalist Initiative, designed for quiet, curious, often overlooked kids in rural Oregon. We would give them the tools and the encouragement to listen to the world in their own way. Our first summer, we had a dozen students. We gave each of them a leather-bound field journal, just like mine. On the first page, we had embossed my grandfather's words, "The world is a conversation. You're one of the few who knows how to listen." A shy, 13-year-old girl named Lily, who barely spoke a word for the first week, showed me her journal at the end of the program. It was filled with breathtakingly detailed drawings of the undersides of mushrooms. Her notes were messy, her labels misspelled, but her observations were astute and original. "You have a remarkable eye," I told her, my voice thick with emotion. She stared at me, her own eyes wide with disbelief. "You actually looked at it," she whispered. "Of course I did," I said, smiling. "It's brilliant." In that moment, I understood. My grandfather's legacy wasn't about reclaiming what I had lost. It was about planting something new in better soil and giving it the light and space to grow. 3 years after the will reading, an email appeared in my inbox. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize, representing Stella Hayes. The subject line was simple: request for visit. My first instinct was fear, a cold dread that she was launching another legal challenge. But the woman who arrived at the trust was not the sister I remembered. Her expensive clothes were gone, replaced by simple jeans and a worn, oversized sweater. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her face was free of makeup. She looked smaller and profoundly tired. She walked into the sun-drenched main hall of the barn and stopped, her gaze falling on a framed photograph of Grandpa Arthur I had hung by the entrance. "He always saw you so clearly," she said, her voice quiet, almost a whisper. "Even when I refused to. Especially when I refused to." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. "I'd like to see it," she said, gesturing vaguely to the space around us. "What you've built." I could have said no. Part of me wanted to. But I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see a rival or a polished performer. I saw a woman who looked lost. So I gave her the tour. I showed her the climate-controlled seed vaults, the propagation greenhouses, the wall of photos from our young naturalist program. She was quiet, asking simple, direct questions. When we reached the community garden out back, where local families were tending plots of vegetables grown from our heritage seeds, she stopped. She watched a mother and daughter laughing as they harvested tomatoes. She watched a young boy intently studying a bug on a sunflower leaf. She turned to me, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Alara." I remained silent, letting the space hang between us. I wanted to see it," she said, her voice breaking. "What he built for you. And what you built with it." She didn't stay long. There were no grand apologies, no dramatic scenes of reconciliation. But as she was leaving, she paused at the door. "What you're doing here," she said, looking back at the bustling lab. "It matters. We don't talk often. But twice a year, Stella drives out from Portland and volunteers at our youth camp. She doesn't work with the plants. She helps the shy kids with their final presentations. She teaches them how to speak clearly, how to organize their thoughts, how to stand with confidence and share what they've learned. The kids adore her. After her first summer, she handed me a small, spiral-bound booklet. I wrote a little guide," she said, avoiding my eyes. "For the quiet ones. On how to make people listen." I read it that night. It was thoughtful, gentle, and surprisingly wise. And for the first time, I saw a version of my sister I could recognize, a version that wasn't a performance. She never said, "I'm sorry," with words. But she says it every time she shows up. And I am learning that, perhaps, that is enough. We are not sisters in the way the storybooks tell it. But here, in this small corner of the world my grandfather dreamed into being, we have stopped pretending. And that, I think, is the beginning of its own quiet truth.